Well, an attack on the media, a blow to press freedom, the prosecution of free speech, the attempted jailing of a journalist. Those are all some of the interpretations of the news this week that the Trump administration has charged Julian Assange with receiving and publishing classified information.
These 17 new charges the US Justice Department has brought against the WikiLeaks founder go far beyond the indictment we heard about last month, which just involved an alleged conspiracy to hack a computer password. This time he's being charged for actions that journalists do all the time, like soliciting and publishing classified information.
So what is journalism? What is whistleblowing? And what is spying? Peter Greste is a founding director and spokesman for the Alliance for Journalists' Freedom and UNESCO Chair in Journalism and Communication at the University of Queensland. Peter, thanks for being here. Just remind us to begin with what Assange has been charged with doing exactly.
Well, in the case of the espionage charges, he's been charged with stealing state secrets and publishing them online. And that's deeply troubling. I mean, obviously, I'm concerned about what that means, not just for Julian Assange, but I also think what it means for journalism more broadly.
Well, yeah, if publishing state secrets online is a crime, doesn't the ABC break the law all the time?
Yeah, well, this is one of the problems, that the espionage laws were designed, and let's look at the espionage law in the United States in particular. It was passed in 1917 in the middle of the First World War, and it was designed pretty much to do what it says on the tin, to prosecute people who were spying for foreign powers to try and undermine national security and undermine the war effort. Now, what we've seen over recent decades is the way that the espionage law has been used not to go after spies so much as journalists or their sources. The espionage bill was used, I think, about 5 or 6 times in almost 100 years, from when it was signed up until when President Obama came to power in 2008. But from 2008 until Obama left office in 2016, he used the Espionage Act twice as often as all his predecessors combined. And in almost every one of those cases, it was to go after either journalists or their sources.
And since we're talking about the US context, just clarify for us, do journalists in the United States have a special protection to be able to reveal classified information, or are they basically protected by the same rules that protect everybody in the States?
It's really under the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects freedom of speech. It also protects freedom of the press, and those are the key. That's the key part of the U.S. Constitution, which really frames the debate around these issues, and in particular protects journalists from publishing the kind of information that we've seen. As I said, that hasn't stopped the U.S. authorities from going after journalists and their sources in the past, and I think this change to going after journalists is a particularly troubling one, because in almost all of these cases, the journalists weren't revealing state secrets that undermine national security. What they were doing was publishing information that was politically embarrassing. And so it's been used in a way that I think has undermined the journalist's capacity to hold governments to account, rather than what it was intended to do, and that's to protect national security.
So let's talk about these borderline cases, of which Assange is obviously the sort of golden child, the exemplar of. He's not a journalist, or is he?
No, I don't think he can call himself a journalist. One of the things about journalism is that press freedom comes with rights, of course, but it also comes with responsibilities. And I don't think that Julian Assange exercised the necessary responsibilities to call himself a journalist. That means taking the information that you get, editing out and protecting the identities of individuals who might have been exposed in that information, picking out stories and the information that was genuinely in the public interest, and then placing that information in context. That's not what WikiLeaks did.
So the question here, I suppose, is does someone, when we talk about the freedom of the press, can WikiLeaks be considered the press? Obviously they cause particular harm by publishing, among many other things, the names of people in Afghanistan and Iraq who had helped American forces and also publishing the names of diplomats around the world, potentially causing people to actually be murdered as a result of having helped the Americans in the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. Since WikiLeaks didn't do the due diligence to make sure that those names were erased, does that deny them the right to be able to, I suppose, speak freely in publishing those names?
Look, this is getting really complex. I think we need to be careful. I think that there are still legitimate protections and legitimate arguments that WikiLeaks should be using around freedom of speech, the transparency, the radical transparency that they advocate and so on. And there are implications for press freedom in the way that the authorities in the US appear to be using the law to go after WikiLeaks. And that's something that I think we do need to be concerned about. Broadly speaking, as I said earlier, I don't think Julian Assange can call himself a journalist. I don't think WikiLeaks is a news organisation in the classic sense. But I think that there are implications for journalists in the way that law is being used, and that I think we need to be is troubling.
The other side of the equation, in addition to a journalist, when you're talking about a big story which is revealing state secrets to the public, is of course the whistleblower, the person who makes those secrets available in the first place. So in this case, it's people like Edward Snowden, or in the case of Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning. What protections are in place, and what protections should be in place for the whistleblowers themselves?
Well, the whistleblowers are a lot more vulnerable than the journalists, and we've seen this in so many of the cases that the Obama administration used the Espionage Act. Again, in almost all of the cases, even though sometimes they went after journalists, it was the sources that were the ones that were prosecuted and sent to prison. And we've seen in this case Chelsea Manning, Julian Assange's main source in the particular case that the WikiLeaks is being prosecuted for, who has already gone back to prison. And I think that's something that is deeply troubling, because again, if we have a look at the information that was published, and particularly in the case of Edward Snowden, for example, what Snowden did was give a lot of information to The Guardian and the Washington Post, and those news organisations went through all of the information. They took out anything that might have been sensitive, that might have exposed innocent people. They published what they believed to be in the public interest. And those news organisations themselves were not published not prosecuted rather under the Espionage Act. And I think that I think is really key here.
Right, and not necessarily their status as a news organisation, but as you say, the practices that they put in place in order to interpret the raw data and present it in a responsible fashion. So can I just summarise how I understand the Professor Peter Grester universe here, which is that on one side, there are journalists and news gathering organisations that go through data and try to interpret it and try to make it relevant for people and try to make it do as little harm as possible when it comes out. And then on the other side, there are whistleblowers who are at the coalface, who are breaking the law, who deserve better protection for whistleblowing on bad things that are going on. But in the middle, there's this vacuous, nebulous kind of grey area where a person like Assange is not actually a whistleblower, and he's not actually a journalist, he's just someone who dumps information.
That's right, and that's what the digital world has done for us. It's created this very difficult space where anybody with a website can call themselves a publisher, but that doesn't mean that I think anybody with a website deserves the kind of protections and deserves to be called a journalist and deserves press freedom protections.
Professor Peter Grester, UNESCO Chair in Journalism and Communications at the University of Queensland, thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure.